Hello, everybody. Mr. Foley here, and today we are looking at the beginnings of our government. That's right. We're starting out by looking at the Articles of Confederation and then moving into the Constitution. And a lot of people don't even realize that the Constitution wasn't our original government. The Articles of Confederation were. And so we're going to take a look at those and try to figure out why didn't they last, and then start to look at what the Constitution looked like that replaced it. So here we go. These go along with your online notes if you need to grab those in Google Classroom. They also go along with the paper notes if you have me in class and for some reason I'm not teaching you in person. So this is what we have. All right, to begin. The Revolutionary War is won. Woo! America is now a country. And so it has to figure out what it's going to do. And at the statewide level, we start to see that the former colonies, now states, create their own governments. And they do a few things. Number one, they keep some of the things that the British had. Britain had a parliament, for example, where there were some representatives. America's going to keep that idea. They're just going to have more representatives. So some ideas, they stay. They tried to make government more democratic, with people having more power. And so they said, well, the British had a king who had too much power. We're going to get rid of that. We're going to have a more powerful legislature that is made up of citizens from the different states so that our voices are heard. And they wanted a republic, a government where representatives govern them, that the people choose. So they want the people in a state to be able to vote for representatives, and those representatives will go to the Capitol and vote on the big issues for the country. And so now the colonies, which are now states, create their own governments and their own constitutions. And so each state has its own government, and they're deciding they're going to work together. The Articles of Confederation, which is created, is a decision to work jointly together. So a republic, a government where people choose representatives that will govern for them, are the following republics. The medieval times, where you had kings and knights and lords and peasants and serfs. No, that's not a republic. The people had very little say at the bottom. Nobody was elected to be in government. So that doesn't work as a republic. Ancient Greece. Yeah, sometimes. Some places in ancient Greece had a republic. Most had direct democracy if they had democracy. Some had kings, some had aristocracy. They had a lot of different things. Ancient Egypt, nope. They had a pharaoh. Pharaoh's like a king. United States, yes, we do have a republic. So the government that's created is called the Articles of Confederation. And it was a compromise of many different opinions to create this government because a lot of people had different feelings, which is pretty normal. So here's what we had. It had very little power. People feared strong government may lead to tyranny. They were concerned that if our government is too strong, we're going to have another king. And why in the world will we want another king? That didn't work out last time. So they give the national government very little power, and the states have most of the power. Number two, it's run by the Continental Congress. There's only one branch. There's no executive branch with the president. There's no formal Supreme Court and judicial branch. It's just the Congress. And this is really showing you how much they were concerned about one person having too much power. Each state had one vote in Congress. Doesn't matter your size. You could be big and wealthy Virginia, or you could be small and tiny Rhode Island. You each get one vote. It's going to cause some issues later on, but we'll talk about that in the future. You could wage war, make peace, issue money, and sign treaties. It covered the very basics. So they didn't have much power, but they covered the basics. And it left taxation and law enforcement to the states. Because they wanted the national government very small, the states would be in charge of taxation and giving tax money to the national government. The states would make sure that laws are enforced and taken care of. So it's a pretty weak government overall because we are a confederacy. And in a confederacy, you have the states have more power than the national government. So the strengths of government under the Articles of Confederation. One of the biggest strengths it had was dividing up and managing Western lands. It was really successful with that, and we still see that success today. So here's what we have. Well, before we get to that, what are the Western lands back then? Well, we are the Western lands, which is kind of crazy. You have your original colonies over here, and really the land in the West is everything up to the Mississippi River. So when we talk about dividing and managing Western land, we're talking about Minnesota, Illinois, part of Wisconsin, all those different things. So how'd they do it? Well, they created what's called the Land Ordinance of 1785, and they took Western land and they broke it into 6-mile square plots known as townships. And so you take a chunk, as you can see right here, and then you break it into sections. These are each 1 mile. And then that 1 mile is broken into smaller sections. So the whole thing is 640 acres, but a half is 320. A quarter, like letter B, is 160. When you get to D and E, you have a 40-acre plot. And a lot of you have probably heard about 40-acre plots, especially for farmers, or maybe 160-acre plot. And that's because this is how things are created around here. This is why you have square mile sections with roads around them. So, the way our land is separated came from 1785, which is really crazy to think about, but kind of cool. And so they have a direct link into how our lives are lived nowadays. So the Northwest Territory had the following areas. Up here it had Minnesota. See if you can get these right, hopefully so. Next we have Wisconsin, Michigan. What's next? Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. So those are the areas that made up the Northwest Territory. And to become a state, you needed 60,000 people. Once you had 60,000 people, you could ask basically to become a state in the United States. So which places do you think came first? Take your guess. The first one is going to be Ohio. Well, that makes sense. They're the furthest east. So next, what do you think? Michigan or Indiana? Indiana is next. And that's partially because it's right on that Ohio River. Third, we have Illinois. Illinois beats Michigan, which is interesting, but it actually makes sense. Illinois is not only on the Ohio River, it also has the Missouri River flow into the Mississippi right there. So a lot of transportation happening in those areas. Fourth, we have Michigan, then Wisconsin, and last, Minnesota. Minnesota, just like the Vikings, finishing last. That's too bad. I'm just kidding. I got to mess with you Vikings fans. So, governing this, how are they going to govern it? Well, they want an orderly pattern, like we talked about, and they want to outline the rights that citizens have in that territory. So what rights do you have? They outlawed slavery. Slavery wasn't allowed. And it's not because they thought, oh, slavery is this terrible thing. It's mainly because they didn't want slaves coming in and taking jobs that white settlers might have. But you get freedom of the religion, trial by jury, no slavery, and there's certain rights that come from it. And then once you have 5,000 men that are free, you can create an assembly. And if you have an assembly, your territory in that area can have some of its own laws. And once you had 60,000, you could become a state. So that's what they did. It worked really well. We have our territory split up into our 40, 80, 160 acre chunks. We have our 1 mile square plots. We have our 6 mile square townships like El Paso or Ellsworth or any of those. So that was definitely a success. Unfortunately, it's one of the only successes. The articles had a lot of weaknesses. So some of those weaknesses, number one, it did not have the power to enforce laws. Think about that. It's like, imagine the police are pulling you over for speeding, but they can't give you a ticket. Well, that's kind of what happened with our national government. They couldn't enforce the laws. The states had to. And if you had a law at the national level and the state doesn't want to enforce it, you're kind of out of luck. So think about that. Here's your new law. Imports will be taxed. Anything you buy from outside of the United States, there's going to be a tax put on it. And that tax money will go to the national government. Well, Virginia sells a lot of cotton in the world. And they have a lot of imported goods that come in as a result of that. Cotton goes out, imported goods come in. Well, what if Virginia just says no? The national government couldn't do much about it. So this was not a winning situation where you can make laws, but you can't enforce them. They could not regulate trade between states. Sometimes states were taxing other states when, yawning, when they sold goods in their state. And this hurts the country as a whole. Here's your example. Imagine that Maryland makes wheat and they want to protect their wheat farmers. In Virginia, farmers grow cotton or tobacco, and they want to protect their tobacco farmers. Well, there are some Maryland farmers that also grow tobacco. So if the farmers in Maryland try to sell their tobacco in Virginia, Virginia puts a tax on it. So maybe Virginia farmers are selling tobacco for $5 and Maryland farmers are selling it for $4. Well, Virginia puts a $2 tax on the Maryland farmers, so their tobacco costs more. And then people buy Virginia tobacco. Well, Maryland's not going to like this. They're going to be frustrated because their farmers aren't selling their products, right? So what do? Well, they put a tax on Virginia wheat. Any wheat coming from Virginia into Maryland has a tax on it. And in the end, both states sell less, most likely. And it's not a good situation. The states should be working together, not going against each other. So another weakness, that the states are taxing each other, and that's disrupting trade. The next one, changing the Articles of Confederation requires all 13 states to approve the changes. This is time-consuming and extremely difficult. Trying to get 13 people to agree on anything is hard. So imagine this situation. You have 12 states say yes to a proposal for a law. They love it. They all want it. And then there's Rhode Island. I'm sorry, not a law, like a change to the Articles of Confederation. Maybe you want to say, well, the United States government can choose rules for trade. If 12 say yes and Rhode Island's like, no, I don't want it, you can't alter the document. It's not allowed. So that's not a good thing. Passing laws took 9 of 13 states to approve. That's a lot. It's a high number, so it made it hard to pass laws as well. The biggest problem was they could not tax people. They left that up to the states, and the states had to give tax money to the national government. But that's really hard to do. These states have a lot of debt from the war. They need to pay that off. Some of them are rebuilding after the war. They're trying to get their government up and running. It's really expensive. And so they didn't want to give money to the national government. Imagine that you're 16 and you have you're buying a car, you're saving money up for your car, and your mom and dad want you to pay them some of the money from your paycheck because you're living at their house and they're paying for your food and your internet and your cell phone and stuff. And they want you to, but they can't make you, and they can't really change how they treat you. Are you going to do it? Some would, some won't. So let's say this. The federal government, also has huge debts they can't pay off because they're not getting money from the states. So that's pretty bad as well. So imagine this. Let's say that the government needs $130 to run. Obviously, it needs more, but that's an easy way to think of this. So each state, if it gives $10 to the national government, the government will run the way that they want it to. So you have 4 states give $10. They do what they're supposed to. But the rest of them, because, well, there's so many things going on, they give less. You see Massachusetts gives 9. Virginia is kind of cheap. They only give 3. Rhode Island, they're just not making friends. They gave $1. And so in the end, you need $130 to run your government, but you have 89. So what do you cut, right? And so this becomes a massive issue that they just don't have the money to operate that they need. And on top of it, the government can't do a ton to protect people. Shays' Rebellion happens, and farmers are upset. Here's what's happening. So Revolutionary War soldiers went out and fought, and they came back home. And a lot of them didn't make much money, and they weren't paid very much money by this new United States government. So when they went home to their farms, they had to pay taxes that they missed when they were gone at the war. And a lot of them can't pay their taxes. So the banks are going to the courts, and the courts are basically saying, sorry, you have to sell your farm because you owe taxes. And imagine being a soldier. You're furious. You just fought to make this country free. And now because the government didn't pay you, you're losing your farm. So the soldiers, they shut down the courts. They basically won't let the judges come in. There's fighting that happens because of it, and it's a mess. And what they learned from this situation is that when these farmers revolt, there's no real, national effort to put down the rebellion. They can't make it happen. And you had this threat of these farmers that were going and trying to take over, kind of like a barracks, but there was no way to deal with it. And so people got scared and they realized, wow, we're a really weak government and maybe we need to be a little bit stronger. So changes happen. In 1786, in Annapolis, Maryland, delegates get together to discuss how trade could be improved throughout the states. They felt that the national trade laws would help the country and the economy. And so, let's imagine that Ben Franklin and George Washington are there, and Franklin's like, hey, let's create a law, fix this problem with trade. And Washington's like, we didn't really give ourselves the power to make laws on trade. The problem was the national government had no power to make trade laws. That wasn't in the Articles of Confederation. So a lot of the founding fathers and others get together and say, all right, let's meet in Philadelphia. Let's discuss the Articles of Confederation. Let's see if we can make some changes that'll help. The meeting becomes known as the Constitutional Convention. There are 55 delegates there, half of them lawyers, many who had served in the Continental Congress, and they are known as our founding fathers. However, there are no Native Americans, no African Americans, or women that are included. Famous people that you see there include George Washington, James Madison, Ben Franklin, and others. But the question remains, why so little diversity? Well, if you think about it, why the lawyers? Well, having lawyers there makes sense. They know law. And if you have a lot of farmers, they may not have the background with the law, which could cause some problems. So I get the lawyer part. But why white men, right? And it really shows you the time and the age. African Americans, for the most part, were still enslaved. Native Americans were many times either your ally or your enemy, but they certainly weren't seen as equals. And it wasn't seen or considered a woman's place to be involved in government at that time. At that time, a woman's place was seen as in the home. My, oh my, have things changed, and that's great. But when our country started, the people that represented the country, it was very fitting for most governments. Usually it was, with European background, a group of white men that were in charge. And so obviously America has made a lot of changes over time, but that takes time to happen. So coming to the convention, nobody really knew what to expect. There are a lot of different ideas. So maybe you have, Franklin's like, hey, what are we going to do? And Washington's like, wait, you don't know what we're going to do? We need a stronger national government so we can maintain order. We also need to protect people's rights. So you have two different sides here. People realize that we need a strong government because we need order, but you don't want to step on people's rights. And hey, George, you can be in charge. And okay. So George Washington is made the president, and we have this convention get together. But what's interesting, I think, is that you have all these people together and they know the articles aren't working, but they don't necessarily know what they're going to do. Are we going to just alter them? Or are we going to blow this thing up and create something new? And that's where you start to see a lot of discussion and debate and compromise on how can we make this country work a little bit better. So that's what we saw. Articles of Confederation, there's problems. We went to fix it. And in the future here, we'll talk about how we worked to fix that. If you have any questions, feel free to talk to your teacher, and have a good day.